everyone. Welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruceman. Today, I have a special guest with us. He's an author, and he has a book out right now through Nightmare Press, and it is called Scrolls of Ramos, Scribe of Egypt. I have with us James, author Anderson. James, welcome to the Horror Realm.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, tell us a little bit about Scrolls of Ramos.
Okay, this is a book I've always wondered, reading through the biblical accounts of Exodus that we have. I always wondered what would it be like to be just an average Egyptian during that time if this happened, and how would it be? What would it be like? So this is really a story about Ramos is the main character, and he's the scribe to Ramses II, Ramses the Great, and he's been Ramses calls him in to sit with him through this whole thing with Moses, and he records everything that happens. So he's sort of the scribe that records it all, and then the Egyptian hierarchy, I guess, tells him, after the fact, get rid of all this stuff because we don't want, bad press. But he doesn't. He kind of hides it, and he makes his own manuscript. And so this is really his rendition of what happened through the 10 plagues of Egypt as told by the Egyptian point of view, as opposed to the Hebrew point of view. And they
Now,
suffer through the gnats and the frogs and the death of the unborn of the firstborn son, and the sun disappears, and it's like a real horror show if you were an Egyptian.
now, to do a book like this on, real life history, did you ever do a lot of research?
Yes, as a matter of fact, my sister talked to me and she said, how did you find out? How long have you been researching this thing?" And I basically said, "Well, all my life, because Egyptian history is kind of a hobby of mine. And it's a sort of thing that grows on you. My first published story was an Egyptian horror, Egyptian fantasy story, a short story in Swords Against Darkness by Andrew J. Offit, edited that. It was a paperback anthology. And I knew just enough about Egypt to be dangerous, but not enough to be accurate. And so I started reading up on a lot of different things on it. And that was in 1979. So I've been reading about Egypt since then.
A long time.
I read just about every book I can get my hands on, from the old things by Breasted, some of the old archaeologists, up to more modern uh, renditions of history, depending on things that they found. So I've sort of become an immature Egyptologist, I suppose. Although I've never been to Egypt, I'd love to go one day. But I've learned everything I could through reading all the history about it and the culture.
Because I can imagine, like, you want to be as accurate as possible with,
Yes.
how things happen in Egypt. Because especially in the year 2025, where everybody's quick to call you out, hey, that's not accurate. So you definitely want to be as accurate as possible.
Exactly. And the problem was with the Exodus, there's no real records of it. I personally, I don't believe that the Bible is a uh, direct history. I think a lot of it is stories that are sort of based a little on history, but they're embellished. And of course, history is written by the winners. So in the Bible, it's the Hebrew point of view of what happened. The Egyptians, there's really no mention of any of that, and the history has they have a hard time figuring out if there were any slaves at that time. They're not really sure if it was Ramses the Second, Ramses the Fourth, or maybe not any at all. So I kind of had to do a little bit of license there and say, well, let me assume that it was Ramses the Second, because they call out Ramses in the Book of Exodus. So let's assume it was him. And I tried to make it as accurate as I could within the parameters of what they have. But it's really hard to say that I was wrong because there isn't any evidence to contradict it, if you know what I'm saying. At least in that part of it. But I did try to get the Egyptian culture correct. The day-to-day lives of people, how they lived, what they ate, where they went to the market, and that kind of thing. And that was really the fun part of doing this. I had learned enough Egyptian history. I thought, well, I might as well use it in some stories.
And a lot of history is hard. I mean, a lot of it's there's some horrific stories in just modern and
Oh, sure. Yeah.
just ancient history. Now, so when you were writing this book, you finish it, you're like, this is the book I want to put out in the world. What made you decide to go to small press route compared to the self-publishing?
Well, I only I tried submitting it to a couple of the big five and even a couple of mid-sized, and they really you cannot get them to even look at it. I published a lot of stuff, but unless you are, well, a best-selling author, Stephen King can get people to look at his stuff, or so it seems like a celebrity. Matthew McConaughey's got a book of poems out. I can't believe it. They're awful, by the way. Uh, the big five won't even look at what they call mid-list authors. And so I shopped around, and actually Jacob was a Facebook friend of mine, and he put out a thing, we're looking for stories. And I thought, well, this isn't exactly horror, it's kind of fantasy. And I ran it by him, and apparently he liked it. And so here we go. I thought of self-publishing, and I've self-published a couple of books, but I'll tell you the truth, it is just it's a hassle. You have to, if you by the time you hire a cover artist and an editor and figure out all the formatting, it's just I don't think the return for me, at least, the return on investment isn't worth it. I'd rather let Jacob handle all that stuff for me.
And I agree. I mean, there's some authors out there who, they succeed in self-publishing, but I can imagine it's hard because you're out there on the island by yourself. You have to do all the marketing. You have to do the cover art. You have to do the editing. You have to do so much is put on you.
Hmm.
And
Exactly. And here, like, I never would have got hooked up with something like this if I had self-published it.
yes,
I rely on people that have contacts and know other people, and frankly, he can do a much better job of putting a book together than I can. I'm an amateur at it at best. I have a hard time formatting things. I struggle with the computer and everything to get it right. So I thought the indie press is a really great way to go. And I published a couple of, I'm a professor, so I published some scholarly kind of books on Stephen King. And I went through McFarland Press, which is kind of an indie press as well. And they treated me really, really well also. So I thought, this is really the way I want to go.
now when it comes to, I mean, at the end of the day, even working on a small press, you still have to do a lot of the promoting yourself. What are some things? 'Cause there's a lot of individuals who are thinking about being a first-time author or, new authors. What are some things that you have done to promote your work?
Well, I started off by publishing short stories. And as I've said, the first ones were in a few paperback anthologies and some magazines and that kind of thing. I've done a lot of poetry, and I've done it both for academic, for uh, university press journals, and science. I've done a lot of speculative poetry. I had a poem in Asimov Science Fiction magazine not that long ago, and so that at least gets you. I mean, you get a lot of experience doing short things, and I've written a pile of novels. I've written a few of them that were, well, they're still in the file cabinet. Let me put it that way, because you almost have to write a lot of bad stuff before you get anything good. Uh, I mean, you have to. Stephen King says that if you want to be a good writer, you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot. And not everything you write is going to be good. Some things will be better. I look at some of the early things that I wrote, and I cringed. I can't believe I wrote that. It's terrible.
Mhm.
But you grow as you go on, and I think the real trick is to be persistent and keep at it. I've probably got enough rejection slips I could wallpaper my house with it. I know it's kind of the cliche, but it's true. And I think you just have to be persistent, keep writing things, send it out till it finds the right publisher. And thank goodness for the indie press now that has saved a lot of writers. That again, the big Scribners and those kind of guys, they won't even look at you unless you've got an agent, and an agent won't look at you unless you've got a big publisher. It's just a vicious circle. So the indie press has really, I think, saved, and Amazon. People give Amazon a bad name, but wow, if it wasn't for Amazon, I don't think the indie presses could survive either, because the big bookstores aren't going to carry anything except the big bestsellers. I go into Books a Million, and it's hard for me to find anything I like there because it's all bestsellers, and some bestsellers are okay, but a lot of them they're not really my thing. Um, so I guess to really be successful, you just have to keep at it. Have to keep writing and keep submitting things, and if an editor gives you feedback, man, you take it and use it. If they, as a matter of fact, the first story I published, Andrew Offutt said, "I'll publish the story, but I want you to do the following things," and he had a 2-page list of what he wanted me to do in a 7-page story. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I really want to be in this anthology. It had some big name people in it, Tanith Lee, and I think he had a reprint of a Robert E. Howard Conan the Barbarian story. I really wanted to be in this
Oh,
anthology really badly, so I'm willing to do anything the editors want me to do. And I've had good editors, I have to say. I really have. I've had not had a bad experience with editors. They've really been they've helped me make my work better, actually.
but don't you think like the big five publishing are doing themselves kind of a disservice by not looking at smaller,
They
authors, indie writers? Because there's some great indie horror authors, authors period out there, and they're not getting attention. And like you said, you go to a Barnes and Noble or a Books a Million, you see the same authors, the same work, the same stories, and it's
right.
kind of doing a disservice to readers.
Right. It's kind of depressing because if you go to the horror section, you got Stephen King, you got Dean Koontz, you got Anne Rice, maybe Dan Simmons, a couple of other people, and that's another guy. I forget his. There's about 6 authors in the horror section. That's it.
That's it.
Um, if you go to the fantasy section, a lot of fantasy stories to me they're kind of like dancing elves.
Hmm.
And if you've read one, you've read them all. And then there's a big market for, I can't get into it. It's kind of like erotic fantasy where, I don't know, people doing it with werewolves and vampires and stuff. I'm not into that. I just can't get into that. It doesn't make any sense to me. But apparently, a lot of people like it.
Hmm.
So it's kind of discouraging in a way. But again, I think with the indie press, it really has allowed a lot of writers to be able to publish things that they would not have been able to publish if without the indie press, really.
Because
And
I've been doing this channel. I'm sorry, go
I'm very fortunate because my job, I'm an English professor. I'm retired from full time. I'm a retired professor, but also I teach a couple of classes at East, Geor- East Georgia State College. And the nice thing about being a professor, you're encouraged to do this stuff. It's like um, I won't say it's quite publish or perish, but if you want to get promoted, you better publish things.
yeah.
And they give you time. I had a couple of the Stephen King books that I had written. I got sabbaticals and time off to write them. It's kind of cool. They pay me to sit home and write these things. So,
See that.
um, so that's kind of nice. I was very lucky to be able to get into that field, and which gives me the time, and I don't have to worry about paying the bills. Where some of these writers, if you try to rely on your writing, it's going to be tough. Now, I have to say, with that said, I've had every crappy job you can imagine, as I suppose every writer has. I worked as a janitor. I worked picking vegetables on a farm. I worked in, I was a phlebotomist. I went around taking blood from
Oh
people. I
wow.
worked in jewelry shops and factories. I was a steel worker for a while. So, but anything that I did, I also wrote. So whatever job I had, I'd go home and I'd write after hours, and because that was really my passion. These other jobs would pay the bills, and the writing was the thing that I felt like I had to do.
Well, James, I'm gonna be honest with you, and my guests who are watching. I I used to be a big horror reader when I was a kid. Stephen King, the Dean Koontz, the R.L. Stein, Goosebumps when I was a kid.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
for years, I didn't read horror because it was either I read everything or it was the same old, same old. And I started this channel almost 2 years ago, and I did not know that there were so many horror authors out there that were. And I'm a huge horror fan. I go to horror conventions, and I never really paid attention to indie horror authors. I pay attention to indie horror movies, but not indie horror
Oh,
authors. So it wasn't until I started doing a channel that I started reading more indie horror because I didn't know about it. I didn't even know this was a thing, and how would you even find them? And I feel like there's so many horror fans out there that don't even know it's a thing.
yeah, I agree. There's a lot of really talented, and it seems like I read more books by indie writers now than anyone else, except for
Me too.
Stephen King, I suppose, because he's my scholarly interest. Like I said, I think I've written 3 books about him at this point. It's what got me tenure, kind of. And I taught a class on Stephen King as well. I was able to teach a senior seminar on him. But other than that, there are very Anne Rice. I can't really get into vampire novels. I think if you've read one, you've read them all.
Hmm.
They all seem to be alike. Ghost stories. I mean, they're okay, but they got to be really different. There's a few. I know Dan Simmons had come up with some stuff that was really, really good and really innovative. He's one of the few big mainstream authors. Um, Clive Barker, I used to like his stuff, but I find myself reading more of the indie authors now than anyone else in terms of horror and fantasy too, for that matter. Like I said, a lot of the fantasy stories, they seem to me they're dancing elves.
Yeah,
They're
pretty much.
they're Tolkien knockoffs, and if I want to read Tolkien, I'll read Tolkien. I don't need to read a kind of a bad knockoff. I
Yeah,
always like to put my fantasy and horror when I can. I like to put it in historical settings, and especially at this point, Egypt is kind of good because I don't know of anyone else that does Egypt. A lot of them do medieval and that sort of thing.
the
Um,
Vikings. Yeah.
and I remember I met with an editor at a horror conference. We had one of these pitch sessions, and he basically said, "Well, what other Egyptian fantasy is there?" I said, "Well, there really isn't much. There's a few mainstream Egyptian novels, but not really much." And it was kind of like, well, since there's nothing else out there, that must mean nobody wants it, as opposed to no one's writing it. Maybe they'd want it if you wrote it. I don't know. So he kind of like was like, yeah, send it to me and I'll take a look at it. But then I never heard back from him. So that was the end of that one.
I just feel like it's an untapped market that, if I worked for one of these big publishers, I would start looking at anything because what if you stumble upon the next Stephen King? Like, that's huge.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And even Stephen King was lucky to get published. When he did, he was the right person at the right time. And he happened to, I mean, he happened to be in a time where the market was ripe for him, and some of the mainstream publishers were willing to look at it. These days it's so hard to break into that big market. And again, I look at Snooky from I forget what TV show that was. She published a
Richard
novel.
George. Yeah.
I and they bought some, I don't know if and people bought it, but the publishers bought it, and she was on, I think it was Jimmy Kimmel, and he said, "Oh, so did you write this book?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I had somebody help me out." She said, "So you ghost wrote it?" And she said, "No, no, I wrote it." And it's she didn't write it.
Yeah.
She could barely speak, let alone.
Hmm.
And they just used her name, Matthew McConaughey. He's got a book of poetry out. Oh my God! I picked one up in the bookstore and thumbed through it. It's like third grade stuff. But he's a celebrity, and just about every celebrity writes a children's book.
Why is that, by the way? I didn't notice
I
that.
don't know why people buy them, but they do. They ignore the and I know there's a lot more authors out there, a lot more talented than me, and they get ignored for these hack wannabes. And I kind of get aggravated, like, aren't you making enough money off your TV and movies? Do you
Yeah.
really need to horn in on our territory?
Yeah. I agree. Because I mean, like, I'm 43, so I was born in '82, and and maybe every generation says this, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, boy, the quality of entertainment out there, whether it be movies, TV, books, in the mainstream, is so low level or low quality, but
Hmm.
the audience loves it. And I'm like, is it because the audience loves it? Is it because they're not used to anything better, or they haven't seen anything better? Because most of the stuff that comes on TV now, and even the movies, I go to the movies quite often to see horror movies in the movie theater. And the last two good movies I've seen in the movie theaters, horror movies, one was Stephen King's The Long Walk. By the way, amazing
Oh
movie,
yeah, I want to go see that. That's supposed to be really good. The book was awesome. I really liked
so
the
good.
book.
I never read the book. The movie was,
Hmm.
yeah, it was great. And the other one is crap. I'm having a brain for it. Anyway, I'll come back to that second one. But like, but like, I've seen a lot of movies this year, and only probably 20. And out of the 20, only two I would say are great. Everything else is the same redundant, mediocre stuff. And I've read a lot of big name books. I'm not gonna name drop them, and it's the same redundant story over and over again. But you pick up an indie movie or you pick up an indie book, and it's something fresh, it's something new, it's something. Not all of it is my cup of tea, but at least it's something original. It's something you can feel that individual has passion, still has passion for what they do.
Sure, it's something different. It's not like you follow the formula. I mean, there are formulas that are good, the hero's journey and that kind of thing. There are formulas that really work, but I think the creative part is deviating from them in some way, or telling it in a different way, or from a different point of view. I know in this book, the thing that I really enjoyed was telling it from the point of view of the scribe of Ramos. It wasn't from a famous person. It was just, he's the scribe, and he follows Ramos around and takes the notes, and he does the hieroglyphs on the tombs and that kind of thing. So I wanted to just getting into his head and telling it first person. Um, I really enjoyed that. That I thought that was a fun thing for me to do. And I think it was a different perspective than what you normally get. It's hard to tell a first person horror story because the person lives in the end, but you
Mhm.
got to make it you got to make it that they have a price to pay even if they make it through to the end. And in this, I won't give away the ending, but in this case, poor Ramos, he pays a heavy price. Uh, um, but of course, he has to survive in order to write his scrolls.
Yeah. Now, something I've noticed in a lot of, not a lot, some indie horror books is, or indie horror books and indie books in general, is the lack of character development. Now, how important is to have? I know in movies, character development you can do away with it, even though I need it. Um, but I mean, it's so important when you're writing a book to have some type of character development. I mean, right?
I think so because if you can't relate to the character, you don't really care what happens to the character. You gotta get into that character's head and like them. And then if something bad happens to them, you feel bad. You want them to succeed. If it's a character you don't care anything about, then to me the book is not very interesting. Like, oh well, so he got I don't know, hit by a meteor. Who cares? Uh, I think the only person that could get away with writing characters that were unlikable was Flannery O'Connor. She wrote some of the most obnoxious, unlikable characters on the planet. But even they were fulfilling because they were so interesting. Even
Hmm.
if you didn't like them, they were interesting. And sometimes they got their comeuppance in the end, and you're kind of like, well, yeah, they deserved it.
Yeah.
But you also could relate to why, even a villain, you have to give the villain a motivation for why they're being a villain. You can't just have
I
them be,
agree.
hey, I'm evil. You got to give them a reason for doing the things they do.
A great backstory for a horror villain is so important as well. But I agree with you. You got to feel something about the character as well. Whether it's like, I'm glad they got that, or boy, I like that person. I felt bad for them. You have to feel something, especially in horror. You have to feel something about when they meet their demise or they even survive. You're like, you have to feel something. That's so important when it comes to horror.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I'll go back to Stephen King. Some of the characters he created are so memorable. I mean, if you think of, Misery, the nurse in Misery, she's the villain, but wow, she is so interesting.
Hmm.
And Jack Torrance in The Shining. Um, the movie and the book are almost two different uh, almost two different animals, but he's so interesting in his villainy even. The characters that are the heroes in Stephen King's books, you really, I mean, in The Stand, for example, some of those characters, they are so real. You almost like see them. You almost think that you know them. They become so realistic, and so you know, when they succeed or they do some heroic act, you're like, yeah, there you go for it. Uh, but he's brilliant in creating characters, and I think the one, probably the one I like best is the Green Mile. The
Yeah.
characters he creates in that are just so memorable. And you know,
Even the
Coffee
side
when he,
characters, even the
yeah,
side characters
when
are memorable.
yeah, yeah, you care about them. You feel bad when you know the one guy gets killed, and you really can relate to them. In Pet Cemetery, when the character goes and buries his child in the grave with the hope that he's going to come back as a come back to life, you think, don't do it. But then you
Mhm.
think, if that was my kid, I'd probably do it.
Yeah, yeah,
So he's got that motivation. You know it's not going to work out well, but you can understand exactly why he's doing what he does, and that is a real that's a hard thing to do for writers to bring those characters to life. It's probably the hardest part of it, I think, but it's also the part that I think is the most that readers enjoy the most too.
I absolutely agree. Now, James, where can everyone find you and your work?
Where can they find it? Amazon
Yeah,
is probably the best place to get anything. I'll have here's my cover. I'll throw it up here.
love it.
But if you go to Amazon, you can get it either in a trade paperback, or you can get it for your Kindle as
Okay.
well. So that's probably the best place. It's hard again. These um, the big box stores do not want to carry indie books so much. You almost have to go in and beg them. You know, the local one, can you carry my book? And they'll reluctantly do it, maybe. But to go through the the chain of command and get one put in every bookstore, it's just about impossible. But frankly, these days, I think more people buy books online than they do in the bookstores anyway. For
They
me,
really do.
the nearest bookstore, Books a Million, is almost an hour away. I live out in the middle of nowhere in Georgia, and so if I want to go to the bookstore, it's a a trip into town. I'd much rather get on Amazon and just click and buy what I want, and I can search for what I want, and I don't have to you know deal with looking through a bunch of things that I don't really care about.
Let's say
Um,
the closest Books a Million to me went out of business last year. So I mean that
oh yeah,
says something
yeah,
that bookstores are going out of business because and
sure.
it's not because people are not they're not offering what people want to necessarily read.
I
Like you
think
said, you
that's
go on
what it is.
Amazon.
I think I actually worked in Barnes and Noble. I was a sales clerk in Barnes and Noble for that's another one of the jobs I've had, and that was before Amazon existed. And it was that place was very busy back then. Um, but they tended back then they tended to have a lot of different selections. They had they had a lot of different things you could get. And I remember when I lived in Rhode Island, we'd go to Brown Bookstore and College Hill Bookstore. They had a lot of academic books. They had smaller press runs. But now it seems that the big box stores, they only want to run, if you're not on the bestseller lists, um, they're not, or if you're not published by one of the big five, they're probably not going to put you on the shelf.
I agree. I agree. Well, hopefully that changes in the near future. But
I
Amazon
hope so. It would be
is great.
nice.
I don't know why so many people have issue with books on Amazon. You see, it's one of the few places that indie writers can get their stuff out there and gather a fan base. So definitely
Yeah.
to shoot over to Amazon and look up James
Yeah.
Anderson.
Yeah.
You pretty sure find quite a few of your work there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I buy a ton of stuff on Amazon. Again, I live out in the middle of nowhere.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of things that I can't get anywhere else. I mean, without a 2 hour trip to Augusta, uh, and so Amazon to me, I mean, that's it's been a lifesaver for me living
It's a
out
godsend.
You know, like my town has 200 people in it.
Oh
They
wow,
call it a city.
that is a small town.
It's the city of Garfield. There's 200 people that live here. That's it. It's mostly cotton fields.
That is a small
And
town.
I used to live in Miami, and I want to get out of the city. I want to go live in the middle of nowhere when I retire and be nice and quiet. So here I am.
And you found it, which is probably an excellent place to be a writer as well.
It is. It's very inspiring. I can go out. I live on 3 acres. I got a pear orchard and pecan trees, and I can go sit under the tree and write. I had a horse out in the backyard. Unfortunately, she passed away over the summer. But I had, my horse lived out there. I'd go and ride around the property with her. We have a little all-terrain vehicle, and we ride it all over the quote city. So yeah, it's the environment out here is really very conducive to writing, and I'm close enough. I live not that far from Statesboro, a major city, where I can go and I teach like I said, I teach a couple of classes part time. Just mostly just to I find if I don't interact with enough people, I don't get motivated to write. So if I go and teach a couple of classes, it kind of motivates me to do more writing as well.
Well, that's amazing, James. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I had you on. By the way, shout out to Jacob over at Nightmare Press for arranging this interview as well.
Yeah, yeah.
All
He
right,
like I said, he's a fantastic editor and publisher, and I'm really I was very happy to be working with him.
yeah. I mean, there's several good small presses in it, but there's some bad ones too. So like, but
Hmm.
that's definitely one of the good ones. I would definitely
Yeah,
say.
you got to do your due diligence and check them out.
Yeah.
But
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to another edition of the Horror Realm. I'm Travis Bruce, and that is James Anderson. We'll see you next time. Take care.
thank you for having me. Bye bye.